So let's talk a little bit about doing an industry analysis as part of your market opportunity analysis. Now, almost all market opportunity analyses start with an industry analysis. And of course, the industry analysis needs to be data driven. Why the industry analysis first? Well, in most cases, it will provide the evaluator with an understanding of the industry and what it will take to be successful in that industry. Now, there are cases when a company is doing an opportunity analysis in an area that is something that their company's been involved in the past. And in those cases, they might want to start with an internal analysis and then move on to the industry analysis. But if you are new to a field, or if you are an outside consultant doing an opportunity analysis for a firm, you will definitely want to start with the industry analysis first. And so my recommendation is always think probably the starting point for a market opportunity analysis is in fact the industry analysis. All right, the essence of identifying and evaluating marketing opportunities is, of course, relating a company to the industry in which it operates. The key to success is found in the firm's differing abilities to deal with the structure of the industry in which they are operating. And so this is the reason that we like to start with the industry analysis, because it gives us a framework and an understanding of the backdrop against which the organization is going to have to operate given the opportunity. Quote by me, it's easier to grow fruit-bearing trees in good soil than in bad. That, of course, means that if you have your choice between industries, you ought to try to pick an industry that looks like it is a preferred industry as opposed to starting a business in a industry that is going to be difficult to be successful in. So, this is sort of a key notion here. What is the purpose of an industry analysis? The industry analysis is designed to help explain the rules of the game, how it's played, and how firms are playing, winning, and will win in the future. So an industry analysis is really about understanding the arena in which you are going to compete. When I was, I played a number of sports when I was in high school and in college. In college, I was a 3-sport winner in college, and each sport was dramatically different from the others. And what it took to be successful in one wasn't necessarily what it took to be successful in another. The whole key behind the industry analysis is to get a feeling for how the industry works, how you win in that industry, and how you lose in that industry, and what will be winning strategies in the future. So the purpose behind the industry analysis is to get an understanding of the rules of the game in terms of being successful. So let's talk about the factors that influence the decision making about a marketing strategy given by the industry. So a couple of things about the industry that we always would like to know. First, we'd like to know what the size of the market is. That is, the size of the industry. Is it a $10 billion industry, or a $100 billion industry, or a $2 billion industry, or perhaps it's a $500 industry. We also then would like to know the structure of the industry, and that of course refers to the submarkets. That is, in every industry, it's broken down into submarkets. You take the automobile industry, the submarkets in the automobile industry are plentiful. There are cars and trucks, and in the traditional automobile industry, it's cars and light trucks. And then, of course, the trucks are broken down into vans, full-size pickup trucks, mid-size pickup trucks, uh, full SUVs, medium SUVs, and small SUVs. And now another factor, that's another submarket, of course, is all of those same breakouts, but in EVs, that is electric vehicles. And the submarkets evolve over time and they change over time. But if you don't understand the submarkets and how each of the submarkets might differ from each other, then you really don't understand the industry. You'd like to know about the growth rate, and you'd like to know the growth rates, by the way, overall, but also by submarkets. If you know anything about the automobile industry right now, the submarkets that are growing the fastest are pickup trucks and SUVs. And the reality of it is that the sedan, the traditional automobile part of the business, tends not to be growing, although there are plenty of exceptions to that rule. You'd like to know the stage of the life cycle. Now, I don't personally, I'm not a big believer in the life cycle. When we talk about strategy, we'll come back and talk about this again. But the question is, what stage in the life cycle are we functioning in? And of course, you probably remember from your basic principles of marketing class that the product life cycle says that there is a introduction stage, a growth stage, a maturity stage, and a decline stage. And it is kind of important for everyone to be on the same page in terms of where in the life cycle the industry is. We'd like to make sure that we understand any issues about cyclicity. That is, many businesses go up and then they go down and then they go up and then they go down, and so that they have what we would call business cycles. The housing business tends to be like that. There aren't enough houses, and so people build houses like crazy, and then all of a sudden there are too many houses, and then the market tends to soften up, and the home builders don't build as many new houses, and then there's not enough houses, and the whole thing starts over again. There's also something that is referred to in the economics literature as the famous hog cycle. And the way the hog cycle works is this: is that farmers all grow hogs at the same time, and when they take the hogs to market, there's too many hogs, and so the price of pork goes down, and when they go to sell the hogs, they don't make as much money because the price of pork has gone down. So the farmers say, well, I'm not raising hogs anymore. I'm going to raise cattle. Of course, when they all start to raise cattle, the price of cattle goes down, but what happens to the price of hogs? The price of hogs goes up because everybody's sort of gotten out of that business. So what happens to the price of pork? It goes up. And then what happens? Well, all of the farmers switch back from cattle to hogs, and they all start raising hogs, and then there's too many hogs, and then the price of pork goes back down again. And that's the issue of cyclicity. There is something that looks like things are in cycles, but they actually are more easily timed. And, so for instance, right now, we talk about the stock market being in what is called a bull cycle. And the argument is that we've been in this bull cycle for 15 years or 10 years or whatever that might have been, with a little blip around 2008 to 2012. Unless you lived in Las Vegas, and it was more than just a blip. But the problem is that with cycles, it's hard to tell when cycles shift from one direction to the other, and it's hard to anticipate those. Seasonality is a little bit different, right? Because we know then that there are going to be changes with the seasons. For instance, people who are in the golf business know that they sell more golf equipment in the summer and in the spring than they do in the fall and the winter, because in a large number of places in the country, there is no real opportunity to play golf as the fall turns into the winter. I have friends that live in Wisconsin, and every year they call me about this time of year and say, it's we're getting ready to start the golf season again. And of course, here in Las Vegas, we don't really have a season for golf. Golf is a 12-month sport here. Then there is this issue of concentration of sales and profits. This is the notion of how many competitors are there in this business, and how much of the share of the total business do the top 3 or 4 or 5 competitors control. So when I moved to Las Vegas, except for the Hilton properties, every casino on the Strip was independently owned. That is, they were all owned by different companies. So Caesars ran a hotel, or Caesars World rather ran a hotel and a casino called Caesars Palace. And and the people from the Ramada Inn owned something called the Tropicana Hotel, and different people owned the Desert Inn was owned by a different family, and the Sands was owned by a different family, and all of the big hotels on the Strip, and Circus was owned by the Bennett family. So all of the people who owned hotels on the Strip typically owned one hotel. Back then there were 2 Hilton properties. One was the Flamingo Hilton, and the other was what we used to refer to as the Big Hilton. That is the Hilton that's next to the convention center. But back then, there was not much of a concentration of sales and profits in the gaming business. Every casino, every company owned a casino, or maybe 2 or 3 casinos. That's obviously very different today, correct? Because today we have 2 or 3 companies who control almost all of the Strip. Approximately 40% of the properties on the Strip are owned by Caesars Entertainment, and probably 40% of the other properties on the Strip are owned by MGM Resorts. And then the other 20% or so of the properties on the Strip are owned by Wynn, which of course has the Wynn and the Encore hotels, and the Sands, which recently sold their stuff to Apollo, had the Venetian and its sister property, and then Ruffin owns the hotel across the street, Treasure Island, but in reality there is much more of a concentration of sales and profits on the Strip today than there used to be. And as a result, it changes the industry landscape, and it also changes the competition, and it changes what you have to do to be successful. So concentration of sales are important. Think about the pizza business. There are lots of small pizza operations, but there are 3 or 4 major pizza operations, Domino's and Pizza Hut, and maybe 1 or 2 others, that have most of the pizza business. And of course, they tend then to have an advantage when it comes to economies of scale and things like that. Other marketing factors that we're interested in an industry, and that is the marketing mix factors. And of course, with the marketing mix, we're interested in, the 4 P's, right? And the marketing mix is the 4 P's of price, promotion, distribution, and what did I have here? Product, price, promotion, and distribution. 3 P's and a D, but we now refer to it, of course, as the 4 P's. And the real question is, what's the most important of those elements? How important is pricing in this industry? How important is distribution in this industry? And so it's important that as you look at the marketplace, you have an understanding of the importance of each of the marketing mix elements. You're also sort of interested in performance ratios, and specifically industry trends and industry issues. That is, what are the trends and what are the issues in the industry that are going to impact how the industry evolves and what it's going to take to be successful in the future. And so these are all marketing factors that are very important in understanding the industry. So then, what do you really need to know about an industry to do a market opportunity analysis or a marketing plan? Well, I always like to argue that it's important to understand a little bit about the history of the industry. That is, how did the industry get to where it got to? How did the automobile industry get to where it got to today in terms of the industry selling more SUVs and trucks than it does passenger cars? How did things evolve for that to happen? We also want to know the size of the market currently and historically. That is, what have growth rates looked like in the past, the size of the market in the past, and the size of the market currently. And of course, maybe some forecasts about the size of the market in the future. And of course, that then, of course, is related to the growth rates. We were doing an industry analysis for an organization not very long ago, and they had a 3% growth rate in their industry. Now, 3% doesn't sound that wonderful to me, but if you compare it to some very, very slow growth industries, 3% seems really, really good. So you really want to know growth rates, and you're going to want to know the size and the growth rates in both the overall market, but also in those sub-markets. You're also then going to want to know what are the success requirements. That is, if you're going to be successful in this particular industry, what do you have to do better than everybody else? Or what do you have to do well? And that, I think, is a really important notion, because lots of people think that they should be in a particular business. And it seems like no matter what business you're currently in, there's another industry that's related that you think would be better for you. But when you sit down and take a look at those industries, in many cases, you don't really have the tools necessary to meet the success requirements. And then finally, what we always want to know about every particular industry are trends and issues. So trends are sort of long-term things that come along, and so there's long-term trends. And for instance, for tourism, there's long-term trends for tourism, but then there's also some issues, right, for tourism. And the pandemic has made safety a much bigger issue. But it really hasn't been so much as a trend as it is a more recent issue that has come up for travel and tourism. And then, in summary, what we like to talk about is what are the advantages for the firm in an industry, the individual firms in an industry. And we typically like to use an acronym called PROFIT. And of course, the idea behind the notion of using profit is each letter then stands for something, right? The sources of an advantage for a firm in an industry include physical sources for an advantage. That is, maybe we've got the best locations. Maybe we got the best facilities. Maybe we got the best stores. Maybe we have the best resources. Second is, of course, reputation. This has to do with something we'll talk about again and again over the course of the semester. That is brand equity. What kind of perceived quality is there for your products? What type of a reputation does your particular brand and your particular firm have? There are some organizational advantages. So certain organizations certain companies are organized differently than others, and in some cases, that organizational structure is an advantage for a particular firm in particular industries. There might be a financial advantage for the firm in an industry. Of course, a financial advantage might come from the parent company's resources, or it might come from a number of decisions that had been made previously. During the pandemic, a number of firms had to go back in and try to raise more capital at a time when it was going to be difficult to actually raise capital. Next is profit, or is information, which can, of course, then lead to profit. So sometimes it's an information advantage. That is, companies who have the best information about their customers, about their competition, and about the industry. One of my favorite lines and little quotes and little sayings is, if you know your customers, you know your business. So if you have better information about your customers than other people have about their customers, in many cases, if you know how to use that information, you can turn that information into an advantage. And then finally, there's the issue of sources of advantage for a firm, and that advantage is a technological advantage. We got better technology than other people. UNLV was behind the curve in terms of online education, and we weren't really very concerned about that because we believed in more face-to-face educational programs than online programs. Unfortunately, when the pandemic hit, then it put us at a distinct disadvantage compared to other schools because the schools that had already embraced online education were in a much better position to be successful over the past year than those firms who were not really up to speed on online education. So it's sort of an interesting way to look at the industry in terms of how does a firm have an advantage in the industry? And how can they have an advantage? Well, it could be a physical advantage, it could be a reputational advantage, it could be an organizational advantage, a financial advantage, an informational advantage, or a technological advantage.